Today, we discover a story where a quiet life is shattered by an extraordinary secret. Samuel Washington, a humble hospital worker, loses his beloved wife Lorraine, only to find she's left behind not just memories, but a hidden fortune meant to change the world. Shock turns to courage as Samuel faces elite families, social prejudice, and the pressures surrounding his son's high-stakes wedding. In a breathtaking moment, dignity triumphs over wealth, reshaping relationships and forging an unforgettable legacy. Lorraine's fortune becomes a force for good, sparking a foundation that lifts children and unites communities. Grief gives way to hope as ordinary routines transform into lifelong impact, and one small family's love ripples through an entire city. Subscribe and hit like. Our powerful stories add years to your life. Join our Story Lovers Club and let us know in the comments, where are you listening from? Have you ever walked past a child sitting alone, her eyes filled with stories too heavy for her small shoulders, and wondered about the world that shaped her sorrow? This is not just another tale of hardship. It is an invitation to witness the unwavering spirit that survives where hope is nearly forgotten. Skolola was barely 12 years old, yet her life in the heart of Lagos, Nigeria, was rougher than what most adults will ever endure. Her skin was dark brown, sun-kissed and weather-marked, her hair often tangled, but her gaze strong. Abandoned by her father, she lived under a battered street kiosk with her mother, Abini, whose struggles with mental illness colored every aspect of their existence. From early morning until night, the marketplace bustled and roared around them. But Skolola's world was painfully still, suffocating in poverty and loneliness. Her dreams felt as unreachable as the stars above the city's smog. Shalola had once attended school and cherished every moment she could grasp books and pencils, learning for 2 short years before the only person who helped her, her late grandmother, had passed away. When she was forced to leave, it felt as if life itself slammed a door shut, locking away all hopes for something better. The people of the market threw words sharper than stones. Madwoman, gutter girl. They hurled these cruel taunts daily, as if Skolola's suffering was a spectacle. Skolola's mornings began with the heavy burden of survival. She woke to the screeches of traders and the sounds of distant car horns, mingling with her mother's erratic shouts. Sometimes Abini was lucid enough to stroke Skolola's cheek and hum Yoruba songs, calling her princess, a reminder of a past Skolola never knew. But these lucid moments were fleeting, swept away by storms in Abini's mind that pulled her into unseen battles against ghosts at dawn or shadowy men at noon. Spolola's reality was a constant balance, protecting her mother from herself, from strangers, from the cruel laughter of vendors and customers alike. The cardboard they slept on was always damp, torn, a fragile barrier against the chill of the earth or the intense midday heat. Skolola would fetch water from a broken pipe to clean her mother up, tie her worn dress loosely, and lead her to their begging spot, enduring stares mixed with contempt and pity. The day's beginning was never hopeful. It was only another round of hardship. The same faces, the same jeers, and the ever-present humiliation that threatened to swallow Skolola's dignity whole. Some came by and threw coins without looking. Others spat curses without care. Yet Skolola kept her gaze steady, refusing to let the wounds show, learning that true pain was something quiet you hold inside. On days that stretched endlessly, Skolola allowed herself to remember her fleeting time at school. The scent of paper, the proud shouts of teachers, and laughter that felt like sunlight. She would watch uniformed children walk past the market, their shoes shiny and their books clutched to their chests, and whisper to herself, "One day I'll wear a uniform again." To Skolola, education was not just escape, it was hope stitched onto her soul. But each reminder of her lost classroom dragged back the memory of her grandmother's passing. The old woman who once found ways to pay school fees by selling fruit she'd gathered, sometimes even skipping her own meals. Her grandmother had acted as a shield, offering Skolola brief respites of comfort and a gentle voice telling her she deserved more. After she died, everything unraveled. There was no longer protection from the world's cruelty. No more school, no more laughter, no more buffer between Skolola and the street. Abini, her mother, had long been unable to care for herself, much less for Skolola, and her relentless battle with invisible enemies grew more intense. Sometimes Skolola asked about her father, knowing she would receive only riddles. "Who is my daddy?" she would ask, tired of the blank hole in her history. Abini's response was always vague, sometimes saying, "The rain is your father," on other days pointing skyward at passing birds, making Skolola feel as if she was born from nature itself. Lessons bloom. Other women in the marketplace gossiped that Abini had been beautiful once, her skin gleaming, her laughter infectious, admired by men and envied by women. That image felt like a fairy tale to Skolola, who only knew her mother as the frail woman, haunted by specters and pushed aside by the community. Yet, in moments of tenderness, when Abini sang lullabies between her bouts of terror, Skolola sensed love that survived even madness. She would hug her mother, promising silently never to leave her side, even as she wished for rescue from their endless cycle of despair. The market vendors, hardened by their own struggles, offered no charity, only warnings to move away, to make space, to disappear. Her nation, her city, her people, they all seemed intent on forgetting Skolola and her mother. But Skolola was stubborn. Beneath her battered exterior thrived a mind that refused surrender. Every day she planned tiny escapes, a secret morning walk at dawn, watching birds peck at crusts of bread, tracing patterns in the dust, telling stories to herself about princesses lost and found. She imagined a classroom where no one called her names, where she could answer questions confidently, where hunger was replaced by the satisfaction of learning and growing. Though the world around her only offered empty stares, Skolola kindled her own hope. When Abini screamed at clouds or argued with her reflection in puddles, Skolola found ways to ground them both, holding on to safety in one another amidst the chaos and mockery of Lagos. She watched the children go by and whispered wishes toward them, believing somewhere, somehow, A miracle might just walk into her life and invite her to be a part of something normal. The city's roar became a backdrop to her silent prayers, each one laced with desperation for rescue, not just for herself, but for her mother too. The city of Lagos was relentless, its energy both intoxicating and overwhelming. Day after day, Skolola and her mother remained shadows on the periphery, never truly noticed unless it was to be ridiculed or dismissed. People hurried past, too busy or hardened to care, their faces unmoved by unbearable hardship in plain sight. Sometimes, on especially noisy mornings, when merchants hawked their wares with booming voices and Okada motorcycles darted between market stalls, Shalola would close her eyes and imagine a quieter place. In her mind, she pictured a tidy home shaded by tall mango trees, laughter ringing through open windows, tables set for dinner, and the gentle embrace of family. These fantasies kept her spirit from breaking. She clung to them tightly, especially in the evenings, when her mother's cries echoed and sleep brought little comfort. No matter how exhausting the day was, Skolola's hope was like a stubborn ember, refusing to extinguish. And even when her stomach ached from hunger, she let her dreams fill the emptiness inside her, a shield against despair. Yet misery was never far away. The rains would sometimes pour so hard that even the lamps on the street flickered in fright. Skolola and Abini huddled beneath their sloping kiosk roof, but inevitably, water found its way through cracks, chilling their bodies and drenching what little clothing they owned. If Skolola was lucky, she'd find a strip of dry cardboard to sleep on. Otherwise, she remained awake, rubbing warmth into her limbs, listening to her mother's restless murmurs. The market seemed crueler during the rains as passers-by yelled louder to be heard over the downpour, sometimes cursing at the beggars clustered near awnings. There were nights when even the police would chase street dwellers away, swinging sticks, forcing Skolola and Abini to run to darker corners. Despite it all, Skolola stayed by her mother's side, fiercely protective, never letting anyone harm Abini in her most vulnerable state. Her mother often repeated, "The world is filled with storms, but you are my sunshine." These words, simple as they were, became Skolola's armor. Hunger was a constant, unwelcome companion. Most days they survived on scraps, leftover bread from vendors who felt merciful, a few naira hastily tossed into Skolola's plastic bowl, or the rare generosity of a kind stranger. Abini, in her rare lucid periods, would tell Skolola stories, tales from her own childhood in a small Yoruba village, where the fields were green and the river ran clear. Skolola would hang on every word, letting the imagery paint over the harshness of market life, if only for a moment. But as Abini's illness progressed, those stories became less frequent and sometimes turned into tangled webs of fear and paranoia. Still, Skolola listened, holding her mother's trembling hand, promising silently that she would somehow find a way to create happier memories for them both. Even as her dreams of returning to school seemed to grow fainter, she guarded them fiercely, refusing to let the world steal them away entirely. Whenever her eyes met the eyes of other children, she reminded herself, "I am no different. I deserve a future too." One afternoon, as the market buzzed with its usual clamor, something happened that would begin to change the course of Skolola's life. She was sitting quietly next to her mother, who was lost in silent contemplation for once, when a commotion erupted on the far side of the market. Skolola watched curiously as a well-dressed woman stepped out of a shiny white car, a rare sight, and began handing out food packages to children in ragged clothes. Shalola's heart pounded. She had learned to distrust such gestures, as kindness often came with strings or disappointment. Yet as the woman approached, her eyes met Skolola's. There was no judgment in her gaze, only gentle concern and a glimmer of hope. With a soft voice, she knelt beside them and placed a warm meal in Skolola's hands. For a moment, time stilled. Skolola felt seen, not pitied, and warmth blossomed in her chest. Something unfamiliar, vulnerable, and wonderful all at once. The woman's name was Mrs. Bankhole, a local social worker known for her stubborn advocacy for children in the streets. Instead of leaving quickly, like others, she listened to Skolola's timid answers and even knelt to speak gently with Abini, who stared blankly at the sky, but allowed the woman to hold her hand. Mrs. Bankhole promised to return as soon as possible. She told Skolola she wanted to help her go back to school, and, most important of all, she spoke with genuine care, not pity. That night, as Skolola and Abini shared the meal together, something began to change in Skolola's heart. She dared to hope. She was filled with questions, doubts, and bubbling excitement she barely remembered feeling. Could rescue truly be close? Could the world finally be turning its face towards her and her mother? For the first time in years, sleep came with a fragile sense of anticipation, and Skola dreamed not just of survival, but of starting anew with dignity and love. The following days stretched in an agonizing blend of anxiety and anticipation. Each morning, Skolola searched the bustling crowd, her heart leaping at every glimpse of a colorful headscarf, or every car that slowed near their makeshift shelter. She tried to hide her hope, fearing its betrayal, but she couldn't help glancing repeatedly at the market's entrance. Abini noticed her daughter's restlessness, and in rare moments of clarity would ask, "Are you waiting for an angel today?" Skolola could only smile shyly, tucking the possibility deep inside her chest. She still faced the daily grind, fetching water, unfriendly jeers, guarding her mother, and enduring hunger. But inside her world was subtly shifting. The idea that someone cared enough to return for her, to promise even a day in school, was so enormous. It felt almost dangerous, as if hope itself might leave her more vulnerable. On a cloudless Wednesday, the miracle happened. Mrs. Bankhole returned, her arms full, not just with food but with books, a new blue uniform, and a sturdy pair of shoes. Seeing her, Skolola's knees nearly buckled with gratitude and disbelief. The vendors and market children watched, some with curiosity, others with envy or skepticism, as Mrs. Bankhole crouched down and whispered, "Are you ready for your first day?" The social worker's car was waiting, doors open, warmth and possibility flowing from within. Abini, sensing the gravity of the moment, became uncharacteristically quiet and allowed herself to be gently led by the arm. As they drove from the familiar chaos of the street, the sights changed. Markets gave way to tidy schoolyards and painted buildings. Shalola pressed her face to the window, drinking in every detail, heart pounding with anticipation and terror. This was a world she had never truly belonged to, but had always dreamed of. The first steps inside the bright school were overwhelming. Shalola was greeted by rows of desks, walls covered in colorful drawings, and the subtle rattle of chalk on blackboards. Though she was older than many in her new class, the headmistress smiled for her, introducing her as a very special girl with a bright mind. Skalola's uniform, still stiff from newness, felt almost magical. She kept touching the fabric to be sure it was real and not one of her fantasies. Mrs. Banko promised to help her mother as well, referring Abini to a clinic where she could finally receive care beyond the neglect and mockery of the street. For Skalola, this day marked the slow unraveling of years of despair, a gentle introduction to an ordinary life most take for granted. The other students watched her with a mix of interest and wariness, but Skalola sat tall, knowing this was a second chance she would never take for granted. Despite this new beginning, challenges remained. Skalola's first weeks at school were colored by awkward silences and sideways glances. Her classmates were curious but cautious, unsure of how to approach a girl whose history was whispered about by teachers and gossiped about by cleaners. Some days were painfully lonely. She wanted to shrink away when reminded she had lived on the streets. But Skalola powered through, propelled by the memory of cardboard beds and hunger pangs and her mother's trembling hands. She worked hard, answering questions and practicing her reading late into the night, determined to prove her place in this world. Every new lesson learned felt like a victory, not just for herself, but for Abini too, whose health, under the guidance of kind doctors, slowly began to improve. School became her haven, a place safe from the vicious winds of the street and a gateway to a different, gentler tomorrow. Time passed, and small changes brought profound comfort. Skalola made her first friend, a girl named Kemi, who admired her unbreakable will and gentle wisdom far beyond her years. Together, they swapped stories and shared laughter, awakening a happiness inside Skola she hadn't known was possible. Mrs. Banko remained a steady figure in her life, visiting often, encouraging her, and continuing to support her mother's recovery. For the first time since she could remember, Skalola dared to imagine a future shaped by more than survival. She pictured herself as a teacher, transforming other lost children's worlds just as her own had been transformed. The scars of the past had not faded, but now they reminded her of everything she had conquered. Hers was a legacy of courage, a reminder that even in the darkest corners of the world, a single act of genuine kindness can spark the flame of hope and change a life forever. With each passing term, Skalola's confidence grew. She learned not only arithmetic and science, but also how to trust, how to laugh out loud, and how to accept kindness without fear of it being snatched away. She participated in classroom debates, her voice ringing clear and strong, sharing insights formed by her unique life's perspective. For homework, she wrote essays about resilience, describing how she and her mother survived the storms. both those from the sky and those inside the heart. Her teachers began to see not the gutter child whispered about in the market, but a quietly remarkable student who braved more than most and came out shining. Shalola's empathy for others became her gift. She befriended the shy and lonely, and she helped classmates solve their problems after lessons. Even at such a young age, maturity radiated from her, a wisdom shaped by suffering, but softened now by new friendships and the promise of a brighter future. Meanwhile, Abini's life was changing as well. Doctors at the clinic understood her illness, treating her gently and with respect, providing her with medicine, therapy, and a room to sleep in that was not open to the elements. Shalola visited every weekend, sharing stories of school and recalling moments of happiness from their former life together. The nurses noticed that Abini calmed whenever her daughter entered the room, often singing fragments of those old Yoruba lullabies. As her mind grew clearer by degrees, Abini began to ask about Skolola's classes, her teachers, her dreams. They started to make plans for the future together. Someday, perhaps, a small home where they would live free from ridicule, with doors that locked only to keep the world's chaos outside. Shalola allowed herself to believe in these plans, nourishing them just as she did her lessons. Though Skolola's life had changed dramatically, memories of the market still haunted her at times. Sometimes, when she heard the distant call of a vendor near the school's boundary, she was swept away by a wave of nostalgia and fear, recalling cold nights and unfriendly faces. Yet rather than shrinking from these ghosts, she began to use them as fuel for her ambitions. Shalola decided that once she grew older, she would return to the market, not as a beggar, but as a helper, perhaps as a social worker, like Mrs. Bankel, or as an advocate for children who'd suffered as she once had. She kept a journal under her pillow, filling the pages with ideas of how she could change the world for others who'd been forgotten. Each page was a promise she made to herself and to her mother, a mirror reflecting both the pain left behind and the hope now guiding her forward. Lessons bloom. At a special school assembly, Skolola was invited to share her story. Trembling but determined, she stepped onto the stage, facing students and teachers who had only known fragments of her journey. Her words poured out with sincerity, stories of cardboard shelters, fierce loyalty to her mother, and the terrifying isolation faced daily in the marketplace. But I also learned, Skolola said, her voice steady, that kindness can change everything, that courage can grow even in the hardest places. She thanked her teachers, her classmates, and most especially Mrs. Bankel. The applause that followed was thunderous, not just for her bravery, but for the truth that, in the heart of every audience member, resonated. Skolola felt seen, finally, for who she was, a survivor, a student, and a beacon to others searching for hope. Inspired by Skolola's speech, the school launched a community outreach project. Students were encouraged to bring food, books, and clothing for children in need. Skolola played a central role, organizing collections, visiting nearby neighborhoods, and speaking with families suffering in silence. With every gift shared, she remembered the cold, hungry nights of her past and made a silent vow never to let another child feel alone or invisible. Skolola became a symbol throughout the school, proof that no one's story is finished until hope is given room to grow. She taught her classmates the true meaning of empathy, inspiring even the most privileged to look beyond their own lives and reach out to those less fortunate. In the embrace of community, Skolola's legacy began to bloom, and her dreams stretched beyond school walls, radiating into the future. In the years that followed, Skolola continued to excel in her studies. She rose early, loving the quiet promise of each new morning. Hard work became her rhythm and determination her guide. She earned scholarships and awards, her story now one of transformation and persistence rather than defeat. Head teachers and local leaders visited her classroom, eager to meet the girl who had overcome so much. Skolola's smile grew brighter, her posture prouder. On weekends, she still visited the market, sometimes pausing near her old shelter to give a kind word or share a meal with those still struggling. Lessons bloom. She never forgot the pain she'd once felt, nor the lessons it taught her about patience, endurance, and gratitude. Every achievement, no matter how small, she dedicated quietly to her mother, her late grandmother, and the hope that had kept her alive when everything else seemed lost. Abini, too, found her own kind of renewal. Though there were still dark days, her mental health continued to improve under careful treatment, and she came to depend less on the clinic's shelter. One afternoon, she joined Skolola for a school event. Sitting quietly among the parents beneath a broad-leaved mango tree, tears traced her cheeks as she watched her daughter recite a poem about light following darkness and the promise of new beginnings. Afterward, mother and daughter embraced, surrounded by applause and the gentle murmur of pride. Skolola promised that, no matter where life led her, she would always return to support her mother, their bond unbreakable. That day, Abini found something she had lost long ago, not only hope, but a sense of belonging and the beginnings of peace. As Skolola grew older, she began sharing her story at youth conferences and community gatherings, always emphasizing the power of kindness and the importance of support for those struggling in silence. Her moving words inspired volunteers, galvanized donations for local shelters, and encouraged bold conversations about poverty, mental health, and forgotten children. The people who had once turned away from her in the market now smiled with respect or offered shy greetings. Teachers at her school asked her to lead outreach trips and peer mentorship programs. Skolola poured herself into each opportunity, remembering the promise she made so long ago under the market's battered awning. She worked tirelessly so that no child would have to endure what she had. Her life now a bridge between worlds. One bright afternoon, Skolola was invited to the governor's mansion, where she received an award for her advocacy and academic achievements. Dressed in a borrowed gown and shoes, her hair twisted with colorful beads, she stood before dignitaries, donors, and fellow students, accepting the honor with grace. When asked to speak, Skolola's voice was steady and strong. It doesn't matter how small or forgotten you feel. Your story matters. There is always hope as long as someone believes in you. The crowd rose in a standing ovation, many wiping away tears. As she glanced into the crowd, Skolola saw Mrs. Bankole, who gave her a proud and reassuring nod. Skolola realized then that her journey was no longer just about survival, but about spreading that fragile, powerful flame of hope to as many as possible. Skolola's journey was far from over, but her spirit was no longer weighed down by loneliness and fear. Every step forward, she carried the lessons of her past, the value of compassion, the cost of injustice, and the resilience that grows in even the harshest environments. She dreamed not only for herself and her mother, but for all the invisible children who waited, somewhere, for a helping hand. The city of Lagos still buzzed with hardship and noise, but Skolola saw beyond it now, her eyes filled with the promise of many tomorrows. Whatever challenges lay ahead, she knew she had the power to change her world, and she would spend her life helping others believe the same. Years later, Skolola stood at the front of a crowded hall, transformed from the frightened child hiding in the shadows of Lagos' busy markets to a confident young woman and respected leader. The walls behind her displayed banners of her foundation, a non-profit organization she herself had established to support homeless children and their families. Rows of attentive faces watched her, many of whom had once experienced the very hardship Skolola spoke of. When she took the podium, her voice rang with conviction, compassion, and hope. "We may not be able to change every circumstance," she began, her eyes meeting those of children and volunteers alike, "but together, we can replace fear with hope and loneliness with love. I stand before you as living proof that genuine kindness has the power to save lives." Throughout the hall, there was a hush, as if everyone was holding their breath. The power of her simple message was almost tangible. Skolola continued, sharing stories not just from her own childhood, but those of the many children her foundation had reached, children who had once slept on the roadside or under market stalls, now reading, smiling, and daring to dream. The applause came not only from gratitude but from recognition. In Skolola, they all saw the possibility of transformation through compassion and persistent action. After the event, Skolola made her way outside, where a small group of street children stood hesitantly by the foundation gates. Unlike many adults who ignored or scolded them, Skolola knelt to their level and greeted each one by name. She listened to their stories, jokes, and worries, sometimes offering food or warm clothes, but always making sure to share laughter, a universal language that transcended every hardship. With her was Mrs. Bankole, her loyal mentor, whose hair had grown grayer over the years, and Kemi, whose unwavering friendship had turned into a dynamic partnership in advocacy. Together, they discussed plans for the week: counseling sessions, skill-building workshops, art clubs, and mentoring meetings with older children who had grown up through the Foundation's programs. Skolola had come to understand over the years that sustenance alone was not enough. Rebuilding a life required trust, patience, education, and most vitally, true acceptance. On days when self-doubt threatened to paralyze her, she remembered the bitter nights, shivering on the cold stones of the market, and she chose, each time, to let love guide her actions. She believed in the sacred obligation to ensure that compassion reached those most wounded, especially the invisible children still waiting for their chance. At home, Skolola's mother, Abini, watched her daughter's journey with profound pride and gratitude. The years of despair and confusion were behind them. With Skolola's encouragement, Abini had found her own small purpose, working at a local bakery, where she kneaded dough and greeted customers each morning. The routine helped steady her mind, and her illness, once overwhelming, was now managed and no longer defined her. Occasionally, mother and daughter walked together to visit struggling families, where Abini would quietly share her story with other mothers lost in the same darkness she had once known. "We went through so much," she would say, her voice soft but clear. "But in the end, it was kindness that saved us." Such visits became precious to Skolola, gentle reminders of what had changed in their lives and why she must never give up this work. Lessons bloom. Their modest home, filled now with the sound of laughter and soft conversations, was a sanctuary from the chaos outside, and Skolola felt safe, her heart healed alongside her mother's. As years passed, Skolola's achievements drew international attention. Invitations arrived from organizations in Ghana, South Africa, and parts of Europe, all eager to learn from the Foundation's model of recovery and hope for street children. Skolola's story appeared in newspapers, on television, and in a feature-length documentary that won awards at several festivals. But she remained grounded, endlessly returning home to Lagos to renew her dedication to the city's most vulnerable. Under her leadership, the Foundation's community centers expanded across the city, turning spaces once occupied by neglect and fear into places of safety, learning, and creativity. In the sprawling market where she had once huddled for shelter, a new center now stood, walls bright with murals of children reading and painting, adults dancing, and everywhere smiles blooming. Each time Skolola walked by, she was greeted by laughter and sometimes shouts of thank you from children chasing each other through the playground. She saw in their shining eyes a reflection of herself, the frightened girl she once was, now transformed by the promise that no life was too broken to mend. One rainy evening, Skolola sat beside her mother in their kitchen, pen in hand, writing in her journal as soft rain pattered against the windows. With the warmth of their home surrounding her and the city's distant lights twinkling beyond, Skolola reflected on the arc of her life, the treacherous beginning, the hands that reached for her in the dark, and the slow, determined climb towards safety, healing, and purpose. "My journey began with fear, but it will end in hope," she wrote. "The world will never be perfect, but every act of genuine love, a meal given, a lesson taught, a gentle word, or a caring hand, raises another child from despair. I am no longer invisible. I am a torchbearer, lighting the way for others who follow." Abini, sitting close, read over her shoulder and smiled, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears, not of sadness now, but of pride and gratitude. Outside, the storm faded to a gentle drizzle. Inside, mother and daughter shared a profound peace, certain their story would ripple outward, touching many lives still waiting in the darkness. Their legacy, born of suffering and built through love, was now indelible and strong, passing from one generation to the next like an unbroken promise. Many evenings at the foundation became celebrations of progress, hope, and togetherness. Skolola's home was filled with laughter, the aroma of shared meals, and conversations that spilled late into the night. Friends gathered in the small living room, former beneficiaries who had grown into mentors and volunteers, educators, and community organizers. At the heart of these gatherings, Skolola told stories that reminded everyone how far they had come, from the uncertain nights under market awnings to the warmth of community. Academic achievements were honored, big and small, as were personal victories. A girl's first published poem, a boy's acceptance letter from university, a local mother who began her own business selling handmade crafts after attending foundation workshops. As each milestone was celebrated, Shalola felt renewed, her faith in the transformative power of kindness reaffirmed. Kemi, still Shalola's closest friend and now a project manager at the foundation, often led games and encouraged younger children to dream even bigger. "You are proof," she'd say, looking at Skolola, "that every child's future can be rewritten." The air was filled not just with joy, but also the solemn recognition of struggle. Stories of failure, heartbreak, and the slow process of healing, never swept under the carpet, but shared openly, so that no one ever felt alone. Shalola realized these collective moments of reflection and hope were exactly what she had longed for all those years ago, when loneliness seemed to stretch endlessly ahead. As her foundation grew, Skolola realized that compassion needed to be paired with strategic thinking and knowledge. She began attending management and leadership courses tailored for social sector professionals, studying late into the night after finishing her daily rounds at the centers. Professional books and online seminars became routine, and she sought out mentors who had pioneered successful community projects in other countries. With every new insight, Skolola shared what she learned with her team. The structure of the foundation evolved. New positions for lawyers, psychologists, teachers, and health workers were created. The staff, once a handful of volunteers, became a robust, multidisciplinary force. Regular meetings fostered innovation, educational initiatives, mental health support, advocacy campaigns, and efforts to reunite families. Skolola insisted on transparency, ethics, and training, understanding that sustainability meant empowering others to lead. Lessons bloom. As she watched her younger colleagues organizing events and guiding children through challenges, she felt immense pride. The foundation no longer depended on her alone. It had become a network, powered by shared belief and collaboration. Shalola saw the change ripple outward, not just in numbers or resources, but in the swelling of hope throughout communities that had once felt isolated and forgotten. The idea that every child could be supported, every life redeemed, was not just a dream. It was now a growing reality. With greater expertise and support, Skolola's foundation was able to partner with city officials in Lagos, finally securing funding to open a second community center in a district where poverty and homelessness were especially entrenched. Lessons bloom. The inauguration drew an enthusiastic crowd, Children with new backpacks and bright uniforms, parents eager for a fresh start, local leaders proud to be associated with the initiative. Weeks quickly turned into months as dozens of young people found a safe place to learn, play, and simply be children again. The new center offered not just academic lessons, but cooking workshops, sports activities, career counseling, and regular health checkups. Older teens who had previously benefited from the foundation became peer mentors, guiding younger children and demonstrating the power of support from within. Some teens reconciled with family members after years of estrangement. Others discovered talents they had never explored before: music, art, leadership, computer programming. Through after-school clubs and inter-community events, the boundaries that once divided neighborhoods began to dissolve. Shalola visited often, listening to stories of hardship and triumph. For the first time, she witnessed entire families rebuilding from the inside out, trust restored, and futures reimagined. The foundation's reach was no longer limited by location. The values it stood for were becoming embedded across the city, sowing seeds for the next generation. One morning, Shalola received an unexpected email inviting her to speak at a high-level United Nations conference on child welfare and poverty reduction. The prospect was exhilarating but daunting. Shalola spent days preparing her speech, writing and revising until the words captured not just facts and figures, but the emotional journey from despair to hope. The night before she flew to New York, she lay awake, remembering all the faces she'd met, the market vendors who fed her, the teachers who encouraged her, her mother's perseverance, and the children now thriving thanks to her foundation. On the day of the conference, standing before representatives from dozens of nations in a grand auditorium, Shalola spoke with heartfelt clarity. She emphasized the vital importance of supporting vulnerable children, not just for charity's sake, but as an investment in the future of entire societies. Real change, she said, begins with the belief in small, everyday kindness. It transforms individuals and eventually communities. Her speech earned a standing ovation. Afterward, delegates from around the globe approached her, seeking collaboration, sharing their own challenges, and offering resources and knowledge. Shalola realized her story was universal, proof that change was possible anywhere. Compassion and resilience met. Upon returning to Lagos, Shalola was greeted by a chorus of excitement from children and staff at the new center. Her journey had inspired not only her team, but also children, alumni, and volunteers across Nigeria and beyond. Children rushed to meet her at the playground, eager to share stories and show off small achievements: a perfect test score, a repaired bicycle, a newfound confidence in public speaking. Shalola listened, hugged each child, and reminded them that every victory, no matter how small, was a sign of progress. Later that evening, as she sat outside with her mother and Kemi, watching the sunset over the city, Shalola felt a deep gratitude and sense of fulfillment. The seeds of hope, once planted by kind strangers, and her mother's steadfast love had blossomed into a legacy of opportunity and transformation. Skolola knew now with certainty, the past does not dictate the future, and even the faintest flame of kindness, when nurtured, can light the way for hundreds more. Her story had come full circle, not just saving herself and her family, but building pathways for countless others to escape hunger, fear, and invisibility. The journey would go on, as every child helped, would soon reach out their own hand to help the next.